afternoon, everyone. For my term project, I chose to do a TED Talk on the loss and preservation of the Native Americans' vanishing languages. Before the contact between the Native Americans and the Europeans, there was a plethora of human diversity. There were hundreds of tribes that had their own languages, cultures, art forms, and spiritual beliefs. Although, when the Europeans came in through the late 19th century, that had all changed. Most of the Native American tribes had been restricted to reservations, and many of their children were taken to schools where it was required to speak English only. This was a part of a program to assimilate Native Americans into the white culture. What this meant was that over time, the Native American languages were either dying or already dead. Towards the 20th century, more than half of Native Americans living in the United States were secluded to urban areas where English was their everyday language. The few languages that were remaining in Native American culture typically were only spoken by elders. Now, in the 21st century, many Native Americans have been looking for new ways to revitalize their old traditions, cultures, and languages. Through the present day, there have been many different organizations that are being established to record these disappearing Native American languages around the world to help revitalize the ones that are close to extinction. One organization in particular is the Living Tongues Institute for Endangered Languages. The Living Tongues organization linked with National Geographic Society to form the Enduring Voices Project. The Enduring Voices Project is a project that is designed to preserve endangered or threatened indigenous languages by identifying areas with unique languages and cultures. Through this project, we can communicate with indigenous people to hear their languages, stories of their culture, and document them by using pictures and videos to do our best to help preserve the languages. In a quote by National Geographic Society, in addition, the Enduring Voices Project, where invited, will assist Indigenous communities in their efforts to revitalize and maintain their threatened languages. By using appropriate written materials, video, still photography, audio recorders, and computers with language software, as well as access through the internet where possible, the Enduring Voices Project will empower communities to preserve ancient traditions with modern technology. Now the question is, why should we care about preserving forgotten languages? What our society seems to forget is that language is both the base and carries history through our lives. Language is such an important part of our society. What it does is enables people to communicate and express themselves. When a language dies out, future generations lose a vital part of their culture that is necessary to completely understand it. In addition, we lose the worldview, culture, and knowledge of the people who spoke it. Most people around the world live in direct contact with native speakers of their language, so it is much easier for them to immerse themselves in the culture and ways of life. While some people argue that the world would be a better place if everyone spoke one language, in particular English, I believe the world would be ruined by the reduction of these languages and cultures. Native Americans want accurate records of their languages, as would most cultures of forgotten languages. Every language further and refines our understanding of cognition, communication systems, and the nature of the mind, and different ways people categorize our collective human experience. Each language should be equally valued, so it is important to utilize our resources and efforts to help preserve Native American languages. What I will explain through my TED Talk is what Native American cultures and languages were like prior to European contact. Then I will talk about the importance of preserving these Native American languages. Roughly 300 to 500 native languages were spoken, but now only 34 are still being naturally acquired as a first language by Native American children. To put this into perspective, about 84% of all indigenous languages have no new speakers to pass the traditions on. If these languages eventually fall silent, then the world will lose some of our history's past human knowledge. In a quote from language advocate Kenneth Hale, "Every language lost is like dropping a bomb on the Louvre." It is language that carries the nature and character of who we are and how we relate to one another, and to all things we experience in life. It is so important to keep Native American languages alive. Now that tremendous efforts are being brought about to renew, revitalize, and restore these languages, it can help our society better understand Native Americans, and it will help instill that culture and pride in them. I hope that my TED Talk fully gets this message across, and that there is a new sense of urgency to do what we can to help bring them back, these forgotten languages. The history of language dates back to thousands of years ago. Language is the key to human lives. What it does is eliminate misunderstandings by using it as an instrument to communicate amongst people. It is what makes the growth of civilization possible, and it is the only means of understanding the minds of the past. By studying written and recorded documents of ancient times, we as a society get a broader understanding of what history was like and what we can do to change it for the better. The wisdom that is passed down from generation to generation has a central place in many cultures. When languages are no longer passed down to the next generation, Children and our society lose the cultural diversity, old traditions, and knowledge of those people. Without constant work to preserve these languages, there will be no way of getting them back. The effect of European settlement was very harmful to Native American languages and culture. By the middle of the 20th century, roughly 2/3 of all indigenous American languages had died out or were on the brink of extinction. North of Mexico, it's estimated that roughly half of the Native American languages have become extinct. Of those still in use, more than half are spoken by fewer than 1,000 people. When Europeans first began to colonize, they brought diseases like smallpox and measles with them. In addition, they used strategies that involved fighting and killing off Native Americans for their land. The Europeans' guns and horses gave them a major advantage. Even the spread of diseases, which is thought to have resulted in 75 to 95% of all Indian deaths, was not always considered an accident. Some settlers would intentionally give blankets to the Native Americans, knowing they came from quarantined areas or infected patients. After hundreds of years of battles, wars, and genocides, it is estimated that between 1492 and 1900, the amount of indigenous people living in U.S. territory dwindled down from 10 million to less than 300,000. Native Americans had been systematically removed from their ancestral lands over the years as a result of both force and various treaties. They crowded onto limited reservations beginning in the 1860s and lasting through the early 20th century. They were also subjected to a program of forced cultural assimilation in the form of government-mandated boarding schools. At these schools, children were forbidden from speaking their tribal languages, wearing the tribal clothing, and observing native religions. Not being able to speak or learn the language of your ancestors not only affects that current generation, but many generations to come. Some people argue that language loss is simply a fact of life evolving, and I could not disagree more. Languages are a way of interpreting the world. They provide insight into neurology, psychology, and the linguistic capacities of our species. Scientists say that different languages provide distinct pathways of thought and frameworks for thinking and solving problems. All of these reasons are why linguistics are scrambling to document and archive the diversity of disappearing languages. Their efforts include making dictionaries, recording histories, traditions, and translating oral stories. If there is good documentation, then there is a chance that these languages could be revitalized. Without speakers interested in revitalizing them, we will not have access to our world's past history, struggles, and triumphs. That is why today there are many different programs and initiatives aimed at preserving Native American languages. Even though it is a slow journey that involves various legal milestones and a lot of funding, it is a journey that is necessary and impactful to our society today. As I was doing research, I read a story from the author John Hunt Peacock Jr. In 1915, at the Fort Taunton, North Dakota Indian School, John Peacock's uncle and aunt were both prohibited from speaking Dakota, which is a native indigenous language, by successors to missionaries who had learned the language in order to convert his great-grandparents' generation of Dakota people. His mother never knew Dakota because in 1916, when she was only 4 years old, she left the reservation with her parents and 7 siblings after her older brother was sexually abused by a white teacher in the mission school. John Peacock was born and raised thousands of miles from the Spirit Lake Dakota Nation and began learning his tribal language only in 2003 from a frayed Dakota Bible. With no elders or ancestors to speak the language with, John had to read ancient books and documents in an attempt to speak fluent Dakota. The reason I most wanted to begin with this example was to exemplify the fact that these forgotten languages are still an issue even today. Without that frayed Dakota Bible, ancient books, and documents, John Peacock would have no form of relations with his native language. The past causes the present. How this ties in is that documents like these help us understand change and how the society we live in came to be. With these old documents, John Peacock can analyze and study the Dakota past and attempt to review changes, improvements, and destructions. If he found something in those documents that is questionable, he can help make improvements, therefore leading to a better result. It is important to understand history because it can always be told in many different versions. For example, imagine you were reading about the history of World War II only through the viewpoint of Adolf Hitler. What would you think your opinion of the war might have been when you finished reading? That is why it is so vital to our society to revitalize these lost languages, because it is the only way to truly understand how history was told in the eyes of the natives. In addition to the story I read about John Peacock, I also read an excerpt that I found accurately represented how intricate the Native American languages really are. The Cherokee language has no word for goodbye, only I will see you again. Likewise, no phrase exists for I'm sorry. It has a special expression of its own. One word, okahusid, represents the mouth-watering, cheek-pinching delight experienced when seeing an adorable baby kitten. All of those things try to help convey a culture. It is a way of interpreting human behavior and emotion that's not conveyed in the same way as the English language. Another story I wanted to share was the story of Tom Belt, who was a native of Oklahoma. He did not encounter the English language until he began kindergarten because in his home, all conversations took place in Cherokee. Tom Bell grew up riding horses. After college, he bounced around the country and eventually ended up in North Carolina, where he rekindled with a woman he had been pursuing. Tom stated that all those years ago, she said the thing that attracted her to me was that I was the youngest Cherokee she had ever met who could actually speak Cherokee. I bought a round-trip ticket to visit her and never used the other end of this ticket. The couple eventually married, yet his wife, whom was also Cherokee, did not speak the language. He soon realized that he was a minority amongst his own people. At that time, just 400 or so Cherokee speakers were left in the Eastern Band. He realized the urgency of the situation, so he decided to take action. Belt and other concerned Cherokee speakers in the Eastern Band began discussing how to save the language. Belt volunteered to teach Cherokee lessons at a local school, and eventually the tribe decided to create a language immersion school for the children. In this school, all core classes were taught in Cherokee. Now, the Cherokee language is offered at the local university where Belt teaches. Cherokee is far from the only threatened minority language. Over the past century alone, around 400 languages have gone extinct, and most linguistics estimate that 50% of the world's remaining 6,500 languages will be gone by the end of this century. Speakers of minority language have suffered a long history of persecution. Many Native American children today are still treated with hostility because they are not primarily English speakers. There is no good reason for children or adults to be discriminated against because of their ethnicity or their cultural background. Such discrimination is a form of racism which attacks people's right to well-being. A poll by NPR, which is a national public radio, examined the extent of discrimination against Native Americans in America today. The poll found that Native Americans experience very high rates of discrimination in everyday life. More than a third of Native Americans and their family members have experienced slurs and violence, and close to a third have faced discrimination in both the workplace and when interacting with police officers. The poll also found that Native Americans who live in majority Native American areas are significantly more likely to experience this kind of discrimination. No one should ever feel the need to change who they are, and by bringing awareness to situations like this, it is the only way to positively change our society. By saving Indigenous languages, we can ensure that natives will be able to freely speak and learn the languages and cultures of their ancestors without being treated poorly. As I touched on briefly before, the Enduring Voices program of Living Tongues is an organization that does things like provide appropriate training and technology in order to compile audio and video recordings to assist in the preservation of Indigenous languages. Between the years of 2007 and 2013, the Enduring Voices project worked directly with Indigenous communities to document endangered languages and prevent language extinction. To do so, the project used various developed language hotspots by identifying the places with the most unique, poorly studied, and threatened Indigenous languages. In addition, the project also assisted Indigenous communities in their efforts to revitalize and maintain their languages. By 2013, the Enduring Voices project had completed 15 expeditions across the world in places like Australia, India, South America, and California in order to work with local communities on hundreds of languages. In addition to the Enduring Voices program of Living Tongues, the Native Languages of the Americas is a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to the survival of Native American languages, particularly through the use of internet technology. This organization has a website that features comprehensive collection of materials and online resources about Native American culture and language. Amongst these resources is an alphabetical master list of Native American languages with links to specific information about each language and its native speakers. The website also includes linguistic family groupings, which shows the relationship between languages, vocabulary lists, Native American cultures lists, maps, Native American books, myths, and legends. So you can see there are many different interactive options to look through and help inform you on the subject matter. Native languages have been in decline for decades upon decades. It saddens me through my research to see how much of an impact the loss of languages has on Indigenous cultures. Reversing language loss is a huge issue in many Native American communities. That is why now there is a sudden effort to address these dying languages in order to help preserve Indigenous Native American cultures in every aspect. Edward Spire, who was an American anthropologist linguistic, argued that language was the greatest cultural aspect about which the human race could boast. I couldn't agree more with that statement. As each language dies, science, anthropology, prehistory, and psychology lose some diversity in data sources. Languages have been existing and evolving together with the development and changes in human society. So without language, we lose a very important part of our society's future growth. Language is a central element and expression of identity and importance in the preservation of group identity. The language we speak is a part of who we are. It gives us a powerful sense of belonging with those who speak like us, and a sense of difference from those who don't. Language is a major aspect of the culture that speaks the language. When a language dies, a major part of that culture dies. By preserving languages, we preserve the cultures of those who speak them. I believe it is crucial to keep Native American languages alive in some form so that future generations can fully understand their native cultures. Even though the odds of restoring many of these languages to their former glory is certainly not favorable, hope can be found in the smallest things, and with hope comes strength and empowerment to help for a greater good. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this TED Talk.